Hey all, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our hands-on review of the A7. This is a retro classic gaming emulation console in the style of a tabletop arcade. So this might be a good idea as a conversation starter, maybe putting it onto an office desk, and would also be cool for kids or just for those who are nostalgic into retro gaming. And a 3-inch LCD display also has a micro SD card which you can use to expand the built-in memory with perhaps even more games and titles. So a arcade design might not be quite as functional as a mini handheld console which you can just tuck away into a pocket for transportation. This is definitely more meant to be sitting somewhere as a conversation starter on a desk. But here's a view of what it looks like, the joystick on the side, and we have some additional specs. Has a built-in battery though that you can last up to 5 hours once fully charged. And we have the console just right on top. Down below is where we'll find the mini USB cable used to charge up the battery. The most notable thing is there is an accessory in the form of two analog controllers that supposedly you can use to plug into the console, but obviously that doesn't come in the box for this particular kit. And here we have the console itself. It's made out of a transparent plastic material, so it does look pretty interesting. You can see some of the circuits underneath if you look really closely and point it at the light. We have A, B, X, and Y controls. We can also start a game. We can select different things, reset it to turn it off, and the joystick itself. On the side here is where we have a volume control. So there's a power on-off on the other side, and on the back is where we have the external connector where you can use to link it up using RGB to a monitor or a larger TV. There's a charging port. It does work while being charged, by the way, and the aforementioned micro SD card slot to expand on the number of games. There's also the pre-inserted BL5C, which reminds me of a Nokia battery. Overall, it looks pretty attractive. The screen is nicely tilted back at a decent angle, but you can't adjust it further. And as a quick size comparison, here it is next to a modern phone that has a 6-inch display. And here it is next to a Nintendo DS Lite. You can see here. Alright, so turning it on, the interface here is actually more complex than I was expecting. It reminds me a bit of a Sony PSP in a sense, or a PlayStation in terms of its controls, which is pretty easy to figure out. Immediately, this is a TN panel, so it's not an IPS display, which means if you are tilting it too far off axes, it can lose some of its color accuracy. From the first bar here, we can take a look at games, which are sorted between the SD card and the 500 games, which are stored inside, either under this folder here, which you can see the list. It includes titles like Pokemon Emerald, which is a Game Boy Advance title, so it really is an emulator here that is looking at consoles from Nintendo. So the first 100 or so are Game Boy Advance games ported over. You see Crash Bandicoot, we see some of the fighting games, Mario Kart is also here. Now there's no way of searching by title, so there isn't a keyboard for entry, but if you move the joystick to the left or to the right, it goes through an entire page at a time, so it makes it a little faster to scroll through the titles. So here we have some NES titles, so a lot of the older consoles from the 90s to the early 2000s are all found here. Now tapping on A will actually act as the select to go inside, and tapping on B is going back by one page. We can also take a look at doubles games. So if you have the optional controller accessory, these are multiplayer titles which can have you battle against a friend or a family member. Now the next tab over also is for music. So you can play back some MP3 songs on here, and it also does support cover art, which is pretty surprising. And you can see the cover art information. There's a visualization if I play back the track, just turning the volume down here just to prevent copyright issues. If we play it, you can see the bars moving up and down, the song title, and I can play and pause. So if you want to use it as a media player, it does also work for that. The thing to point out though is the built-in speaker isn't that great. Not only is it rear facing, but it's a little bit tinny and muffled. So for the best listening experience, I would recommend plugging in your own headphones. Now at this time, I also want to point out that it does also have kind of a backlight on the side of the display. So that kind of matches the transparent plastic, so that if you are looking at it in a darkened room, it does create a very interesting effect, as you can see there. You can also see the ribbon cable connecting the display to the board. Alright, so going back out of the music, you can also take a look at videos. So really the same thing, you can play back AVI, MP4 videos, so it acts as a very basic media player, and there's a sample video here built in by default. It's actually a trailer for what looks like a racing game. We can play and pause the track over here, and we can also skip ahead if we want to. So yes, there is also a video player functionality to this. Alright, so exiting out once more, we also have an image viewer. So again, this interface of scrolling up and down is just very similar to the Sony PSP that we just saw a few days ago, and the other PlayStation consoles as well. So interaction and navigation is pretty easy to figure out, and overall, I'm not too mad about this layout. There's also an ebook, so it can show text files. It's not the most complex thing in the world, but yes, you can scroll back and forth. Over here, we also have a file manager, and under settings is where we can change the background. So for instance, if I don't like this particular image, I can change a theme here. So that changes just the color, but the layout is actually still the same. So we have 4 different options to pick from. All right, so exiting out of this, we can also change the language and just the sound adjustments, and that's more or less it. So going back into the games here, the primary games, the 500 titles, are all fairly unique. I haven't seen any repetition in my quick hands-on so far, which makes sense because it's essentially an emulator, so it's capable of playing back more advanced games and titles than many of the other retro arcade consoles we've seen, which have just a handful of not-so-great games sometimes built on in, and they sometimes are just a copy or a ripoff of the original. But these are the real ROMs, the Game Boy Advance ROMs ported over, and you don't need a SD card inserted to save your progress in the game as well. There is a little bit of memory dedicated to saving your progress, and press on start. All the controls are fully mapped, so everything is correctly calibrated in terms of A and B doing the right things as if you were playing on an actual Game Boy, so that's pretty cool. So we did have a game save state, and if I tap on here, it does load back in the place that we left off. And overall, you can see that frame rates and graphics are actually not that bad. It is pretty smooth and responsive, no real lag or sluggishness. Obviously, Pokemon isn't really a fast-paced game, so you don't have to have as much of a tight latency between pressing something and seeing it appear. That matters more for racing and for fighting games, but you can see that all in all, for a title like Game Boy, it actually does work and do a respectable job here. But here we are, it is the full version of the Pokemon ROM, and everything is progressing along pretty well. So if we just tap on a Pokemon here, this is actually the very start of the journey. We can see what a sample battle looks like. And speaking of the other controls, again, they are fully functional, so if I am satisfied with something, I can just tap on OK here, and if I want to save a game progress, we can just tap on Start here, and we have the option of just saving the game, pressing on Select, and we are able to just save our progress. And other very quick titles here, this is a demo of Crash Bandicoot. This is the Nintendo Game Boy Advanced version. Tapping on Start, we can begin a new game, and it will proceed with the storytelling first. The graphics here are actually pretty similar, I think, to the original Game Boy Advance, which is to say, by 2019 standards, it's not amazing, but it does work, and you are able to kind of move along. There's quite a few tutorials going on here, which is what makes it seem a little bit jumpy at the beginning, but after you start playing along and get past some of these help and tutorials, it will run a bit more smoothly here. There's also strategy games like Rolling Cube, so we have to try and get this cube over to the end mark within the allotted time span without falling over the edge, or the game will end. Now, if there is any downside, I would say using this particular joystick is probably not as precise as using a thumbstick on a real controller that you see from, let's say, a PSP or maybe a newer Nintendo unit. This is a little bit larger. It's what you see on arcades. It requires a larger force to exert and move. So you have to end up kind of shifting and spending a bit more energy to move it in the correct direction to get it to move. But other than that, it seems to work all right, and loading back the titles are pretty quick. Once it is loaded, you can see how the games are rendering at pretty much 100% speed, so there's no real lag or delay either. So that's more or less it as far as our quick, just hands-on review. Compared to the previous console that we saw, which was by Go Comma, and this was $15, I think that this is actually a much better option. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but the quality of the content that you can play with it is actually much higher because it's able to support actual ROMs from real systems like Game Boy Advance, for instance, NES, so on and so forth. I was also pleasantly surprised by the features because not only can you play back games, you can also do a little bit of music playback, video playback, and photo playback on the console itself, which are some added features. So a pretty cool gadget, a gift, or something just to use as a conversation starter on a desk. If you are looking for, again, a retro arcade machine, I would say this is one of the stronger ones I've seen. So you can check out more details in the links down below. But for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been our quick hands-on review of the A7 Retro Arcade Emulation console.